Hi, I am Sarah Blackhurst.
And I'm Brian McCain.
And we're back at you with Making Action Happen, the show that we do for Action 22. We are a nonpartisan, member-driven organization that serves 22 counties in southern Colorado. And we talk about all of the public policy issues that come up around every single thing that happens for the whole state. So we always have a lot to talk about. We've got two really great guests today, and we're going to pose the same, we're posing the same basic question, and that is on all of the stuff that's happening, all the development that's going on, is Colorado capable of setting the example on how things should be done? This is no small feat on any one of those. But we've been having a lot of conversations about redistricting.
Yeah. So today we actually have Mr. Greg Brophy on, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about redistricting. Greg, welcome.
Well, it's good to be with you guys.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So to start off, we have a census going on right now, and with the census comes the political redistricting in every state based on population. And what we're going to see is a redistricting of the congressional districts on the federal level and also the state districts. So getting into that, I know before we jumped on, you mentioned the Y and Z and how this is going to affect redistricting, and is it political or is it not political, and what's going to happen. So start with Y and Z.
Well, propositions Y and Z passed in 2018 with overwhelming support. And the question is, and I think the whole country is watching Colorado, the question is, can we do redistricting of congressional and state legislative seats in the state of Colorado in a truly apolitical fashion or not? And if we can, we will become the model, I think, an example along with Iowa for a way that it can be done to get rid of the scourge of gerrymandering.
And what is gerrymandering? Everybody brings that up. Whenever you hear redistricting, it's gerrymandering. What is actually the definition of gerrymandering?
Well, the layperson's definition is using the power to draw maps to give a distinct political advantage, electorally speaking, to one party over the other. Mm-hmm. You can actually use this process to draw districts in such a way that even though one party gets, say, 53% of the vote statewide for all of the state House seats, that party could be relegated to no more than 45% of the seats in the state because you successfully gerrymandered them into districts where they win overwhelmingly a handful of seats and lose by 4 or 5 points, enough seats to not collect the majority, even though they get more votes, they earn more support statewide.
Interesting. One question that some of the Action 22 members have on the federal side of redistricting is they try, the term they're using is you got to make a competitive district. And we see all these proposed maps coming out where it's, just like Pueblo's one district and, the West Slope's one district. But if I recall correctly, it's based on population, correct?
Right. And on congressional, it has to be plus or minus one person from being equal with all of the other districts in the state.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. And what's the population size for a congressional district?
Well, you take the estimated state population of 5.8 million and divide that by 8, because we believe we'll have 8 seats. That gives you 725,000 people to make up a congressional district. And again, on congressional, it has to be plus or minus one person. Now, in the state legislative seats, it can be plus or minus 2.5% off the ideal population.
Okay. And you brought
725,000 people. I mean, think about how many counties the size of Action 22 counties, with the exception of El Paso, you have to combine to reach 725,000 people.
Yeah, it's huge, especially for the rural area. Our population center is obviously the Denver metro region and El Paso County, which I think El Paso County is almost that population right now when we see the census data come in. But for the rural areas, you worked in a congressional district. I worked in a congressional district, and the districts we worked in were some of the largest in the country. And the reason for that is you had to get that population. What do you foresee happening with the redistricting on the congressional level in Colorado?
Well, I think we're going to get the 8th seat. So that'll be an addition. And everybody knows that while Colorado has grown, we've added almost 800,000 people. That's our best guess since the last census. We were right at 5 million, and we expect to be at 5.8 million this time. So 800,000 people have moved to Colorado since we did redistricting 10 years ago. And I was on the committee in the state legislature that tried to do that in 2011. So most of those people have moved into the Front Range. As you mentioned, El Paso County is very close to 720,000 people now. The bulk of the rest of the people have moved into the I-25 corridor basically from El Paso County north all the way to Fort Collins. I mean, I'm from Yuma County, I'm from Ray, and Ray or Yuma County has basically been the same size. We're right at 10,000 people, and we've been at 10,000 people since 1970, I think. So nothing changes out there. And the reason the congressional offices that we worked in were so large is because those rural counties have to be included somehow, some way. And I'm an advocate for maintaining 2 almost exclusively rural districts in Colorado. And I know Action 22 is signed on to that concept also. And that's because, in 2011, in an attempt to do some gerrymandering, Douglas County was added into the 4th congressional district, which is the district for which I worked and where I live, and I consider that mine. Right? So I take ownership of the 4th congressional district. That's mine. And I love the folks in Douglas County, but the truth is they don't really have anything in common with the people that live in the eastern plains of Colorado. I mean, they have light rail, and they have Park Meadows Mall, and they have a median household income of something like $115,000 a year. And we don't have any of that in Yuma County or in Crowley County or in Lincoln County. And we just don't have much in common with them. And I think it puts the congressperson then into a slightly difficult position when, a good, 40% of your constituency is supportive of the federal government partially funding a light rail project, and 60% of your constituency just wants their highways maintained with the same money. And it puts them in a position that they ought not be in. And so I just think we should have the folks that start drawing these maps start off with the goal of drawing 2 almost exclusively rural districts. One would be the Eastern Plains, and one would be the Western Slope. And they obviously come together in Action 22 area. And I know what I would do. I mean, personally, again, I'm a farmer and I'm a homer for Eastern Colorado. I would gladly take the San Luis Valley into the 4th congressional district, but that's not my choice. If the folks in the San Luis Valley would prefer to be with the Western Slope, then they're going to get their chance to make that case come June, when the Redistricting Commission has hearings. They're supposed to have 21 hearings around the state for the congressional seats, and an additional 21 hearings around the state for the state legislative seats. So I imagine we'll have a hearing right there in San Luis Valley, probably Alamosa.
Yeah, and one more question about the federal side. When they look at this redistricting and when the committee is going to look at it, do they try to choose a commonality of what's represented in a congressional district? Again, going back to the, Douglas County and Los Animas County are 2 sides, like different sides of a coin. They're polar opposites, right? So when they're going to look at this, do they take that in consideration when doing the redistricting maps?
They are supposed to. There are criteria that they're supposed to follow when they're drawing these maps. And this becomes even more important when you get down to drawing the state legislative maps. As we said, a congressional district is going to have 725,000 people in it, for crying out loud. A district for the state House of Representatives in Colorado, there's 65 of them. It's going to have about 89,000 people in it. But one of the criteria for the drawing of these maps is that you're supposed to keep communities of interest together. And so that's what I look at a lot when I'm talking to people about, what makes a community of interest. And honestly, there's almost nothing in common, no community interest between Los Animas County and Douglas County.
Right.
And the question is, when you're putting 720,000 people together, or 725,000 people together, what constitutes a community of interest that's that large?
Yeah.
Well, I think one of them is obviously agriculture and energy production, which is what you see in Eastern Colorado. And another community of interest for the district that you know so well, Brian, is public lands and natural resource issues that are important to the people that live in the 3rd Congressional District, and the western slope of the current 3rd Congressional District, western slope of Colorado. So that's one of the items. You're supposed to not unnecessarily break up political subdivisions. So you're not supposed to split a county in two unless you absolutely have to, or a city in two unless you absolutely have to. You are supposed to try to make seats that are competitive where possible, or highly competitive where possible. That's a little more challenging in Eastern Colorado, for instance, because we're just overwhelmingly conservative in most of Eastern Colorado. So competitiveness is probably not going to be a major item of consideration for Eastern Colorado. And competitiveness is last on the list of things listed in Y and Z for consideration when drawing districts.
And then my other question is, do they take in geography as a factor? Again, working in the 3rd district, it was quicker for me to drive to the ocean than it was to Grand Junction sometimes from Pueblo. Is that a factor that they're looking at when they're going to split this up?
One of the factors is compactness of the district. Now, as we said earlier, you can't make rural districts compact, but that's also part of an argument for, I believe, starting off by making 2 fully rural districts, leaving you the ability to take the other 6 and make them compact.
Okay.
So I had a really quick question. When I first started to understand a little bit about gerrymandering and what that was, of course, I was really shocked that that's actually a thing that happens. I kept saying, how is that possible that it happens? And I've been assured that it certainly does. And then they started to show me some of the maps and I was like, oh yeah, that happened. What does Y and Z do to prevent that?
Well, it starts off by establishing the criteria, again, in the Constitution that you're not supposed to deviate from. So, compactness of districts, not breaking political subdivisions, things along those lines. 1. And 2, probably more important than anything else, is it created these 2 commissions, one for congressional and one for state legislative, made up of 12 people, 4 Republicans, 4 from the largest major political party, 4 from the 2nd largest political party. So right now that's Democrats and Republicans. And then 4 commissioners who are unaffiliated with either party. And then it tasks nonpartisan legislative council staff from the state capitol with drawing the initial map based on the criteria listed in Y and Z. They're not allowed to even look at residences of existing legislators, with the exception of state senators who are in the middle of a 4-year term. They're not allowed to draw a state senator who's in the middle of his or her 4-year term out of the seat that they represent. And then if the partisan people or the commissioners want to make a change to the map drawn by legislative council following the criteria, it takes a vote of 8 of the 12. And it must include a vote of at least 2 of the unaffiliated, not affiliated with either party people, to try to take all the partisanship out of it possible.
Interesting. So looking at the state redistricting, how many seats are we going to see added in the state house?
0. The
0.
state house and state senate are fixed, 65 in the house, 35 in the senate. So what happens after redistricting is you just have to add population or redraw the seats so that they're relatively even in population. So let's go back to my part of the state. Let's go back to Eastern Colorado. The 65th House District currently has Cheyenne County, Kit Carson County, Yuma County, Phillips County, Sedgwick County, Logan County, and Morgan County. Well, at the time, that was within the boundary of 1/65th of 5 million people. Those 7 counties no longer make up 1/65th of 5.8 million people. So we're going to have to add more people to that district. And the same thing with the 64th, which you guys have as one of the House districts in Action 25 area. It has the southeast corner of Colorado. That district also doesn't have enough total people in it now. So it needs to expand in its size to get to 89,230 people, plus or minus 2.5%. And the same thing with the Senate district. So you take Senate District 35, which right now rolls across all of Southern Colorado, from the San Luis Valley all the way to Backett County, excluding most of the city of Pueblo and Pueblo West. That's Senate 35. It's the biggest Senate district in the state. 17 counties or something crazy like that. It still doesn't have enough people in it. So they're going to have to somehow, some way add people to that. And then you go up into the metro area, Northern Colorado, they're going to end up making those seats smaller, believe it or not, because people have moved into those seats to exceed the population that is evenly distributed amongst the state of Colorado.
So they're going to shrink and we're going to grow, basically, is what
Right.
you're saying for the rural. Do you foresee any of the more of the rural districts, specifically around Denver, like possibly encroaching in on the Denver metro area to add some of that population?
Yeah, what's likely to happen is something like that. Well, you got 2 choices. Again, you're looking at the rural parts of the state, Eastern Colorado, Western Colorado. You can make one really big, entirely Eastern Colorado state Senate seat, or you can try to keep 2 Senate seats with at least a chunk of Eastern Colorado in it. If you do the latter with 2 seats, you're necessarily going to have to grab more population somewhere out of that Front Range mix to make sure that you get the Senate seat all the way up to, 170,000, 180. I got that one at 165,700. That's the challenge.
So we had this discussion at the board meeting last Friday on the Action 22 board meeting. And there's a map that we're really liking that would do exactly what you're laying out. It would put the Western Slope as a district, so District 3. It would make the San Luis Valley part of District 4 as it is now, and it would make El Paso County its own voting district. And they have the population. So looking at it, there's the population to do that. There was still some concern, I think, about representation. We had some of our board members say, look, we very rarely saw or heard from, or even were responded to by people who were supposed to be representing us. How do we make sure that we get represented as we're talking about these maps and how this should go? Is there any way to do that with redistricting to make sure that these guys who have felt that they're not really getting represented? Because they don't have to be, because the numbers are in a different place. I mean, the voting numbers are in a different place. There's no incentive to get them to look at some of these really small rural communities.
That is part of the problem when you have a district that's going to be 725,000 people. But that's one of the reasons why I'm such a huge advocate for the 2 rural districts concept, because then there won't be a population-based area that so overwhelms the rest of the little tiny counties like Yuma County that we never see the representative or the member of Congress. Part of that is in the nature of who those folks are. I mean,
right.
Cory Gardner is one of my closest friends in the world, and when he had the 4th congressional district, he was a maniac. He went to every corner of that district all of the time, and it was just in his nature. It's what he wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you think
Scott
back,
Tipton was the same way. Scott
Right.
Tipton was exactly the same way.
exactly the same way. And Wayne Allard, going back another 20 years, even when he was a U.S. Senator, he made a point of having a town hall meeting in every county in Colorado every year, believe it or not. And he did it.
I drove him to a lot of those. I was the appointed staff driver for Senator Allard when I worked for him.
Yeah.
But that's part of the risk, and that's one of the challenges with the big congressional districts. And now, when you get to the state house side of things, that's another reason why you need to make sure that you work towards compactness when possible. When you look at the way House District 64 right now is gerrymandered, and it's truly an example of gerrymandering. It includes Washington County, which goes up to within probably 40 miles of the Nebraska Panhandle, and Backett County. And there was no reason for them to do that. It's just that they were mad at the people in Washington County and were poking them in the eye on purpose, in my opinion, because there's no reason to do that. When you look at Cheyenne and Kit Carson County, are both south of Washington County, but included in the district north of Washington County. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
And look at the mountain, the House District map for the mountains is equally gerrymandered. When you include, how hard it is to get around those communities in the winter. Yeah. And you need to be thoughtful of that when you're drawing these House District maps. Again, you can't do it on the congressional maps, but on the House District maps where they're going to be down to, what are they at? Something like 89,000 people. You should try to keep those in a way, situated in a way that everybody that lives in the district has access to their legislator, and vice versa.
Yeah, and to defend our former bosses, again in the winter, I could have drove to the Gulf of Mexico before I could have got to Grand Junction some nights, and we had a scheduler that started off, and she wasn't from Colorado, and I remember her booking meetings from Denver to Grand Junction in December with 4-hour break in between. And I was telling her, it's like, you can't do that. She's like, well, it's, when I look on the map, this is how far it is. I'm like, that's a 12-hour drive if you can even make it over there during the winter. And then you even get into some of the mountain communities with the state districts where you have like Telluride to Montrose, where on the map, it's right next to each other. And it's still another 8-hour drive to travel 40 miles as the crow flies.
And then throw in Red Mountain Pass, which is closed through most of the winter. And it's actually, you actually have a state House seat that has membership from both sides of Red Mountain Pass. It makes no sense. Yeah,
it's bizarre. But again, if you look at a map, and sometimes people that aren't familiar with these areas, they're like, oh, it's right next to each other on a map. It's easy.
Well, and that's what's going to be really important about these 21 public hearings around the state. They're required to have 3 in each of the 7 congressional districts. So there will have to be a public hearing where the people of the San Luis Valley will get to come and tell the commissioners and legislative council staff what's important to them, why they're a community of interest with other people, and about the roads, for instance, that it's just ridiculous that you can't get from point A to point B for 4 months out of the year. We ought not be included in a district with that. And Y and Z say that the legislative council staff shall take into account public testimony that is consistent with the criteria for drawing maps.
So when these hearings come about, how do our listeners and membership get involved with this to say their piece?
They will be, I'm sure, given that we're under semi-COVID rules, there will be multiple opportunities to participate in these things. One through letters and emails to the commissions, and another one for actual public in-person testimony. And I kind of think that we've almost perfected this remote participation that I bet you there will be, but I don't know this yet, but I'm going to guess that there might be the ability to participate in these things remotely. So you'll have a chance to sign up, come in and testify and say, so for instance, the San Luis Valley, I want to hear from them. I want to hear from folks in San Luis Valley. Would you rather be part of the Western Slope Congressional District or part of the Eastern Plains Congressional District? It's not, it's not up to me. I'd love to take them because I see San Luis Valley as a rural farming area that cares about water and agriculture and hopefully energy production. but it should be up to them to say, not me.
Yeah.
Come in and say your piece.
Yeah, and we're going to do our best to make sure everybody's aware of this and try to motivate people to come in and testify and submit letters and everything. And as you know, like, we already support one of the proposed maps that we've seen out there. And this is very important to Action 22 and its membership.
Yeah, it's a huge deal.
And I see Action 22 as a great clearinghouse that will let people inform people of when their opportunities will be.
Well, thanks, Greg. We've just got a minute or two left. Is there anything that you would like our listeners to understand or know that they maybe don't understand about this process already?
Well, the two most important takeaways, as far as I'm concerned, are: one, the eyes of the entire country are going to be on Colorado to see if legislative districts can be drawn in an apolitical manner, one. And two, as citizens, you have the opportunity to actually participate and have, your wishes heard by legislative council staff and the commission through the ways that we discussed just a second ago. And you should avail yourselves of that, because this decision lasts for the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Absolutely. Well, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about what is Colorado capable of as far as setting the example. We're going to have, but it's going to be on the energy front. We have the legendary Francis Koncilja with us, and we'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to Making Action Happen. For the second part of our show today, we have Francis Koncilja. She is originally from Pueblo, but she's a Denver lawyer, and she formerly sat as a commissioner for the Public Utility Commission, or the PUC. There's a lot of acronyms in energy, as you might have already picked up. And she's also the principal for the Koncilja Public Utility Law and Strategy firm. So the question we're going to pose today is basically what we talked about during all of our discussions on energy last week, but in particular, we've asked Francis to join us and talk a little bit, follow up from our energy summit last week, and talk a little bit about Senate Bill 072 or Senate Bill 72. But we asked us the same question: is how does energy policy, how do we find a balanced approach to energy policy that benefits customers, strengthens Colorado's economy, and expands Colorado's energy infrastructure? So Senate Bill 72 is all about transmission. Francis, thanks for being with us. Tell us, can we start out with a little bit about you and how you got involved in a transmission discussion?
Well, when I was on the Public Utilities Commission, I was the only commissioner that was really interested in markets and transmission at that point. So there was a Mountain West transmission docket that was open to study what 7 utilities were doing, Public Service, Black Hills, and a few others, in terms of having a joint agreement on tariffing. So I ran that docket. There were 5 stakeholder meetings. There were dozens of people, hundreds of things filed, expert reports that were done by each utility, by the Brattle Group, to analyze whether or not it was cost efficient to have a Mountain West transmission group, which was not really going to be a full regional transmission organization. It was sort of a baby step into it. And then Public Service pulled out of that because they concluded that there was not a cost benefit to customers. It was going to cost customers more than it was going to benefit them. So then in 2019, the General Assembly passed Senate Bill 236, which required the Public Utilities Commission to study markets and transmission. So I was designated as the hearing commissioner to open that docket. The legislature told the commission to spend $500,000 on a study. Myself and staff put together a 20-page order that played out a lot of the history so that people would have a background. And then after I left the commission, staff proceeded to get the request for proposal. And so Siemens has been hired to do a cost-benefit analysis on some very big, but also some detailed parameters that were set forth in this 20-page order that was issued in 2019. So it just became extremely interesting to me because there was so much trying to get the right words because, I do speak in 4-letter terms, which has gotten trouble in the past. There was a lot of misunderstanding about key concepts, and there was, I thought, a rush to judgment. I am still not persuaded that a regional transmission organization is a good idea. The study will be completed May 1. It's cost the citizens $500,000 because this came from the fixed utility fund, which is paid for by utility customers. And then it will open up for comments. Stakeholders can file whatever they want into the proceeding, and the commissioners, the 3 of them who are there now, 2 of them are picked by Governor Polis, will make a decision and a recommendation as to whether or not it's in the best interest to join an RTO. Now, regional transmission organizations are tied into, is there enough transmission out there? And regional transmission organizations, if you join them, they're the ones that really decide where the transmission is going to be built and who's going to pay for it. So these transmission are tied into the regional transmission organizations. When I read Senate Bill 72, I was appalled and quite frankly annoyed, because what the sponsor did on that bill is he made the decision for all of you and for the commission. And the Senate Bill 72 says the investor-owned utilities shall join a regional transmission organization and the commission shall order them to. A, I don't think the commission has the authority to do that, but B, they're in the process of doing the study. So what the sponsor did is he created what I call a rebuttable presumption, because I am a lawyer. And he said it is in the best interest of the citizens of Colorado to order the utilities to join an RTO. And the commission should now study not whether or not it's in the best interest, but if it's against their public interest. So,
okay, so for those of our listeners who don't speak lawyer, what's the difference between in the best public interest and not in the best public interest? Like, what is the difference?
Well, the difference is the commission right now is looking at, is this a good idea for all the citizens? If this new bill passes, what they will have to do is put on their advocate's hat, which regulators shouldn't have on, and say, you have to stay in this RTO unless we determine it's against the public interest.
What would determine against the public interest? What qualifies for that?
Beats the hell out of me because they still don't define what the public interest is. And when I was on the commission, had tried to lay out some parameters as to what was the public interest. One was cost.
Yeah.
One was reliability. And one was reducing carbon emissions. And so you look at all of those. And when I look at how RTOs have functioned in the states that have their utilities in them, I can tell you that most states that have their utilities in a regional transmission organization have much higher rates than Colorado. Colorado has been able, even in spite of Black Hills, which is a whole separate issue, which I won't go into here, but even though Black Hills rates are very high, 42% higher than public services, Colorado's electric rates are much more modest on an average basis than other states that are in RTOs.
So if we were to force utilities to join an RTO, is it any RTO? Is there a specific RTO? And who else is part of the RTO that we're supposed to join? That was a lot of questions, sorry.
Well, there's not a lot of options. There's CAISO, which is the California Independent System Operator. And you can't join them because CAISO is controlled by the California General Assembly. And if you join an RTO, you give up a lot of authority. And so if you join CAISO, you would be giving the authority to the General Assembly in California to decide how things are done. And over the last 10 years, there have been numerous proposals made to the General Assembly in California to sort of share the authority so that other states could join. And they don't play well with other people because they think that they have the word on high as to how we should all live our lives. So CAISO is not an option. The other option is SPP, which is Southwest Power Pool. And the problem with Southwest Power Pool is A, they had blackouts in the extreme weather in February. B, these entities are expensive. SPP costs $185 million a year to run, and those costs are all shared with its participants. And SPP, under its articles, its mission statement, is a 501c6. They do not act in the public interest. There is no requirement that they make decisions that are in the best interest of the public. They make decisions that are in the best interest of their members, and they have three classifications of members: transmission owners, transmission customers, and then there's some financial traders that are in there too. So and these organizations, what I had given to the legislators, the Senate, on Tuesday and thought they might read, but they didn't, is photographs of their very expensive buildings. I mean, CAISO's got 500 employees in a LEED certified building that is stunning. I'd like to go to work there every day. You would too. SPP has another gorgeous building, not LEED certified, that has 600 employees. Colorado ratepayers will be paying for some of this. And the question is, does it add enough benefit to outweigh the cost?
So I guess that's my next question with regard to that. This is a very, very complicated issue. And if we're going to say that what's in the best public interest or what is not in the best public interest, how is anybody supposed to know, as a regular ratepayer, how are they supposed to know what the difference is? This requires an associate's degree to understand any of this.
Well, it requires more than a law degree, because I've got the law degree and it took me a long time to understand this, and there's still bits and pieces. There's lots of articles being written about it as we go. And that's why I thought and tried to persuade the Senate Energy and Transportation Committee that they needed to kill the bill, or at least strip out the RTO piece.
So let's talk about what happened on Tuesday.
Well,
that's when you testified. How did that go? What were you talking about? And you had sent me an email saying something's changed. So let's talk about Tuesday.
Well, what happened Tuesday, and I thank your participants and your members in part for the few good things that happened. One good thing that happened is they put, and let me jump ahead to the transmission organization, because part of this bill also sets up an independent authority that will make all the decisions about building transmissions in the state, and they will be financed through revenue bonds that are issued, and they will be controlled by a part-time volunteer board that's not paid, which means whoever wants to build the transmission will be running the place, because this stuff is too complicated. Even at the PUC, when we had experts who advised us, it was very hard decisions to make. So Senator Scott is the only person who asked one question, and he asked a question of Alice Jackson, the head of public service, to said, what is the problem you're trying to fix? Why are you not building more transmission? And Alice had some very good answers. She said we were going to proceed with some transmission in southeastern Colorado. It was not cost effective. It was going to cost customers too much. There was no reason to do it, so we didn't do that. We have been building smaller transmission lines. So the things that your members helped on, and I want to give them a shout out and thank them, is there was enough consternation behind the scenes at the Senate Transportation and Energy Committee that the power of eminent domain was sort of whittled down, because the statute currently gives this new authority the power of eminent domain. So now the power of eminent domain does not apply to county or municipally owned lands. It will still apply to private lands, and it will still affect conservation easements. The proponents of this bill, I'm told, refer to the eminent domain piece as to solve the San Luis Valley Lewis Bacon problem, because 10 years ago he tried to build transmission, or the public service did. He shut that down. He then put a lot of land under a conservation easement, and if this passes and the governor signs it, that conservation easement means squat, because they will be able to condemn and pay for only the value of the sliver of land they take. They also put in a requirement that they will be subject to the 1040 local control rules about siting. And I think the fact that they didn't have that in the original bill is telling that they're not interested in local input, but your members got out there and they put that in. So that's good. And then they put the labor protection piece in, so that the transmission builders, in some respects, will have to compete on the same basis that like Public Service or Black Hills or Tri-State does. They'll have to hire for the most part, union workers or best value employment metrics. It's a little more complicated than that. So some progress was made, but not a lot.
Okay. What would need to happen at this point for this bill to sit comfortably? I mean, in no legislation does anybody get everything that they want. What would need to happen at this point for there to be some consensus, but to make everybody feel comfortable with joining an RTO or doing that? Can we build our own? Can we have our own RTO? I guess it'd be my next question.
That was explored in the docket that I was in charge of before I left the commission. And FERC requires you to have a certain size. Colorado alone doesn't have the size. You could create one, but they are really complicated and very expensive to set up. And I'm not sure that that would be in the best interest. What could you do and improve it? I don't know. Someone described it as a turkey, but I just think that's insulting to turkeys. This
That's
is
fair.
Really bad bill. At a minimum, they should have stripped out the RTO piece and wait until the Public Utilities Commission finishes its study. And, I became a fan of the Public Utilities Commission staff. There's a lot of hardworking people there, some really smart women professionals. And think about it. You've been working on this for 2 years. You modeled an RFP. You went out and spent $500,000 of ratepayer money. And Siemens is going to produce their analysis May 1. And the General Assembly is saying, so sad, so sorry, we've changed our mind. Don't worry about that.
So why is it so important to have this be the cornerstone of that? Why is it so important? Do they feel it's so important for us to join an RTO?
I think there are certain people that love to resume build and fundraise over these sorts of issues because the environmental community is very enthusiastic about RTOs. I think a lot of them are very good-hearted people and really care about the environment, as do I. I'm not sure they understand the complexities of an RTO. I mean, I was sitting there Tuesday when nobody had a question to ask me, which I found disappointing. But I had my 3 minutes, the same as everyone else, and ARP had their 3 minutes, and Alice Jackson had her 3 minutes. I was struck by how the environmentalists, because the Nature Conservancy testified and the Sierra Club, how they've sort of changed their mission.
Okay.
And I'll make some enemies with this, but that doesn't bother me.
Nope.
Somehow they care more about closing down fracking than they do about keeping pristine forests whole. What transmission building in the mountain areas is going to be is you're going to run a transmission highway through forests. And I don't think the environmental community would be wild if we were running big highways to do extractive drilling. And it strikes me that we ought to be evaluating these things on the same basis. Why do we want a transmission highway through the San Luis Valley? They create forest fires. Look at California. You've got
Right.
to do vegetation management, which is a euphemism for doing scraping and cutting timber, strip mining.
Right.
And so I was struck at the environmental community, who I think are good people, having different standards for transmission than they do for oil and gas.
And Francis, just want to say you've always been a champion for Pueblo and us little guys down here, so I appreciate that. One question I always ask when it comes to any energy policy or any policy on the state level and federal is, if this passes, how hard is it going to hit the pocketbooks of those of us in Pueblo and rural Colorado that we don't have a lot of money? And with the COVID, we're hurting worse than ever right now. what's going to be that impact if we go forward with this?
I think it's going to ultimately increase rates. And the problem with joining an RTO is like joining the Hotel California. It looks great on check-in. You can't get out of the damn things unless you pay the exit fees, which can be tens of millions of dollars. And I think it will increase rates. The environmental community are convinced that it will allow for deeper penetration of renewable energy. I quite frankly don't know what that means. I don't think they do either. One of the very nice people said on Tuesday that it troubled her to think that public service was producing all this wind energy and didn't have a place to sell it. If you join a market and public service has excess wind generation, the market prices that and knows that. And so they pay, you have to pay to have somebody else take it. So last summer, I think it was running 2 to 4 cents a kilowatt hour they were charging to take it, because the market knows the only way the production tax credit continues to be valuable for a wind generator is if it's actually running. Solar's different. That's an investment tax credit. Wind is a production tax credit. So if you just can't produce, sell the wind, you don't get the production tax credit. So these markets and the tariffs they put in are just so complicated that only the insiders will understand them.
So many of our energy partners, Action 22 and these organizations, have taken on very, very aggressive goals in order to reduce carbon footprint. And they're doing it in, I mean, as far as this goes, lightning speed to do that. How would this possibly add or help those goals? How is this going to be of benefit to them trying to do exactly what they're supposed to be doing with joining an RTO?
Well, the only way you can do it is if you have a tariff that is drafted so that it gives a benefit to clean energy. So what you have then is no longer just a straight market on price. You have a market based on other things. And just keeping track of that and figuring how the energy flows is a cost. And I think that the utilities and in Colorado, not only the ones that are regulated by the PUC, but the others, the rural electrics, the municipals, are really making strides in terms of meeting the governor's goals and meeting the statutory goals. So I am not convinced you need an RTO to get there. And the other problem with RTOs is you transfer almost all the authority from your state PUC to the RTO and to FERC. And if you think the Public Utilities Commission is complicated, you have not looked at the FERC filings.
And I guess that was exactly the point I wanted to make, is that if we do this, this is not a Colorado transmission organization. This is somebody else, and we've just given over, and so I excuse the pun, the power to somebody else to create the power in our state. Am I getting that correct?
You got it. You nailed it.
Okay. Is there anything that you think right now that would persuade the proponents of this bill to change their minds, or to make alterations, or to back off on this at all?
Well, I think that people should contact President Garcia, because he is the president of the Senate. I mean, this bill is being pushed by, I think, Steve Fenberg and Chris Hansen. Chris is a sponsor, and he got Don Corum on it. And Don, I have a lot of respect for. Don thinks it's going to create jobs. And Chris threw out on Tuesday a statistic that I found amusing. He said he had a lot of statistics I found amusing, but nobody wanted to vet them and nobody wanted to ask him questions. I could have cross-examined him and done one hell of a job, I want you to know, but I didn't have the time and nobody asked. So,
we would have liked to have sold tickets, fundraiser for Action 22.
he said that it's established fact that every mile of transmission creates 76 jobs. And nobody said to him what kind of jobs and for how long.
Yes.
And I believe the transmission building will create some jobs, and it will fill up your Motel 6s on the Eastern Plains, and maybe a food truck that drives by from Kansas and sells food to the workers. But these are not good, high-paying jobs.
Right. Frances, I appreciate you so much for being with us. We are out of time. We could talk about this for a lot longer. We're going to be watching and seeing what we can do to help out with that. Hey, Chad Borthman, I know you're listening. Next week, we will see you and meet you in person for the first time ever when we do our show about ag appreciation up in Denver. Brian and I will be up there. Until then, or next time, I will ask overly complicated questions, and Brian will share his recipe for velvet red green chili cupcakes. We'll see you guys then.
All right. Thank you.